So we'll go ahead and get started. Today is Tour Accounting Tools, which originally I was going to title Spreadsheets Part 2, but then realized that there was some things from the spreadsheet workshop, from the tour budget workshop, from the advancing workshop, from all of these things, and just some random stuff that I've utilized or wanted to share more about. And so really putting it kind of all under the heading of Tour Accounting Tools is how I kind of landed with that. I do want to get to any questions that you guys might have. The best way to do that is to put them in the Q&A. When the chat is moving, it's hard for me to see what the questions are. So put it in the Q&A. I now think I understand that if I say that I'm going to answer it live, that then everybody can see what that question is. So there's some technicality on that that hopefully is more helpful to people. And then kind of at the end, when I'm doing more of like the Q&A stuff, feel free to raise your hand and I can bring you on if you want to ask a question live. I'm happy to do that as well. So especially the people that wanted to jump in with questions on the production touring crew workshop, that would be a great time to raise your hand and pick my brain on whatever. It can be related to tour accounting, careers, resumes, whatevs. So we're going to start with, we're going to talk about settlement a little bit, then we're going to talk about tour budgets, and then we're going to talk about kind of some other info, and particularly some processes I developed for dealing with like a large volume of bus drivers specifically. So a lot of my experience has been, you know, if you may or may not know, I was the tour accountant for the Warped Tour for 9 years, which is was a traveling festival that had about 42 shows in 56 days or something like that. We mostly had 6 in a row, and sometimes we'd have 13 or more in a row. So it was a busy summer every summer. We usually had about 8 stages and about 80 to 100 bands playing on those stages each day. There was usually somewhere between 800 and 1,000 people on the road. Of that, for production, we usually had about 20 to 22 tour buses. And of course, there was mobile stages, truck companies, sound vendor. We had no lighting vendor on the tour because the show happened during the day, so we didn't need any lights. So it was a pretty big traveling circus, and we were building a city every single day. We would go from an empty field, sometimes like literal empty field, like there was no infrastructure, nothing there, to doors being open we could do it in about 2 hours. It was really, really impressive, the volume of building that would be able to happen in a very short period of time. So being the tour accountant on that traveling property is going to be much, much different than frankly anything else out there. So a lot of what I'm showing you is not so much for the purpose of you're going to potentially do the thing that I was doing specifically, but what I want you to take away from it is my thought process and how I created the systems that I put in place. So some of those systems will be transferable to other tours, but a lot of them is just thinking about why I created those systems in the way that I did, and then using that same thought process in your situations to be able to be more efficient and streamlined. So one of the things that was really nice about doing the Warped Tour for so many years was I was able, each summer, I dove into a complete redesign of one of my processes. So, you know, one year I did a complete redesign of my settlement workbook. Another year, a complete redesign of the employee payroll spreadsheet workbook. Another year, redesign of the bus driver processes. And always, in everything in life, I'm always looking for ways to make it more efficient and more streamlined and a smoother process. So even if something seems like it isn't top-notch shape, it always could be a little bit better. That's a little bit of the perfectionist in me. So also knowing when to go, all right, this is good enough for the purposes that I need it for is it's good to kind of keep that in mind as well. But then regularly checking back in on, have situations changed where now I could elevate the system or rethink the system? So I know a lot of people are taking the time at home during quarantine to work on their spreadsheets, and I applaud you for it. I think it's a great use of time, so keep doing that. All right, so jumping into, we're going to start with the settlement advance. So as we had talked on our Writers and Advancing workshop, advancing is the process of communicating what information you need to as the tour, to the local promoter in advance of the show. The idea is to have the smoothest show day possible. And one of the ways that when I'm dealing with a large volume of show dates, people on the road, bands, everything, whenever I'm dealing with such a large volume, the number one thing that I'm always updating and trying to accomplish is what questions can I answer before you have to ask them? So my settlement advance evolved over the years. As soon as I found I was getting asked certain questions over and over, well, if I know the answer to that, I'm going to tell you the answer before you have to ask me. And I find that that is one of my number one tips when it comes to advancing, is to anticipate and be proactive about giving the information that you know is going to have to transpire anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share. And I know that watching me do these technical things and make sure everything's lined up is probably everybody's favorite part of this workshop. All right, so settlement advance. My number one tip, and this I learned from a colleague who worked in marketing and sent out lots of template emails that were requesting marketing assets, was to build, if you're sending out template emails like this, you build it in your email signature, and then you just select that signature. So over here in signature, right now it says none because I think I put it in, but I have settlement advance or just my normal Jen Kellogg signature. So in this case, it might not show it because I did some editing, but it was built in as a signature. So when this comes up, the signature is in, I can just insert in the hi to whoever I'm addressing it to. I'm always sending it to, in the tour book that the tour information that the agency has sent over, I'm sending it to every name that is on that. So it's going to probably be the talent buyer, the promoter rep, possibly there might be a venue general manager that's on there. So anybody that I have the contact information for, I'm going to send it to them. The subject line. Make sure your subject line is both useful to them and to you, because you're going to be asking for information back. And if your information that comes back only says, you know, if this was Concert Business Basics, if every single email coming back just says Concert Business Basics, what date are we talking about? What venue are we talking about? So being consistent in your subject line. So in this case, it would be CBB settlement. It's in Oak Park on this date. So having whether it's the venue name, I find that less relevant, but the name and the date of the show, in addition to the show name, which is what's really important to who you're sending it to. So put in who it's to. I like to start out with, if I'm sending it to people that I already know, it includes a sentence of looking forward to seeing you again. Most of it's the same, but it's kind of, you know the drill, and give me my responses, please, or pass it on to whoever. If it's a new person that I'm sending stuff to, I'll just delete that line out. So I like to have it built in. It's easier to just delete it. Start out with who am I? How can you reach me? Why am I emailing you? And if there's somebody that you want to have kept on copy. If there are other people that you want to have questions directed to that are not your department, include who are those people and how to contact them. The next I have is, I want to know that you read these things and are getting back to me with this information. So it's worth noting that I set up daily tasks for myself as repeating calendar events when I'm on tour. So I think it was Tuesday, it's either like Sunday night, because usually we would have Mondays off. So a lot of times tours are dark on Mondays. So on Sunday night, I would send out my initial settlement advance emails. And then I would have, so they're in people's inboxes first thing Monday morning. And then on Thursday, I would have a follow-up, if I had not heard back, with all of the answers to the questions that I'm looking for. So this developed over time, that I found having this information up front was going to make my day much easier when I'm on site. Knowing who I'm going to settle with, knowing the box office for Warped Tour was always, interesting situation makes it sound bad, but it frequently is an interesting situation. And a lot of that was because our doors would open at 11. Technically, music was supposed to start at noon, but it was a general admission show. So you've got 10,000 plus kids lined up, and the tour producer liked to get the music going as quickly as kids could get in. So a lot of times music would actually start playing at 11:15. The schedule was not announced in advance. So it was really important to get all of the kids in through the front doors so they could get the schedule and get in front of the stage they wanted to be in front of, all in a very quick time period. So the box office also need to have a quick flow to it. So I kind of became like the box office liaison person. So making sure that there was no line at the box office, also making sure that you would be surprised at how many times like the ticket would have been built incorrectly in the system. So one of the reasons I'm asking for day of show ticket price, inclusive of all of these fees, is because I had a number of occasions where we'd show up and the ticket was supposed to be $40, but it was $42. And that is much easier to deal with getting fixed before the day of the show when the box office is already open. So that's why I asked that in advance. And I always make sure I would go check in with the box office about 15 minutes before it opened to the public, just to double check on all of these things. I'd show up in person, so I needed to know what time does the box office open. And that's why the box office contact, because who am I looking for when I get there? Also, frequently in settlement advances of all kinds, you're requesting some cash, and getting a confirmation that that cash request has been received and is okay is an important thing. So I would build all of these answers that I wanted back. I would build into a calendar appointment, a calendar entry on that show day, so that when I woke up that morning, my alarm would go off an hour before the box office was set to open. And that would give me time to get up and whatever before I needed to go check in. So then in that calendar, I would have the contact information, everything I needed for that day was in that calendar. So it was also a way that I could, would go through it and verify that I had all of the answers to these questions. The calendar would start out as an all-day event. And once I had all of the final answers, I would change the event to the actual time that the box office open, in the right time zone. That's an important one. Check your time zones. And that was a visual way on my calendar for me to be able to verify that I'd gotten all of the information I needed in advance for that particular show. So that's the stuff that I want them to email me back, right? So here up front, here's your homework to whoever's receiving this email. Next, we get into a whole lot of, here's information that's going to be helpful to you guys and what I'm going to be looking for. Any paperwork, W-9s, charities, we had 25 cents for every ticket. That the promoters were writing separate checks to. So information related to that. I had a box office advance sheet, and then CWAs are centralized withholding agreements. So for foreign artists that are on a tour, rather than having non-resident entertainer tax withheld at every show, they can fill out some paperwork where basically their management company or somebody withholds that for the entire tour. And anyway, there's paperwork involved. So I put that all in a Google folder. And the reason I used to attach those things to the emails, but I found that if I put it in the Google folder, then I can very easily just swap out what I need. I need to add a new CWA in, I can just put it in there and I don't have to go back and re-email everybody. So it was a way of making sure that all the forms got to where they needed to go and could easily be updated without having to re-email people. So those are things that I know that I would be asked for at settlement. So I'm going to provide all of that up front. Next, my cash request. How much do I want? What denominations do I want it in? When do I want to pick it up? Because of the situation on Warped Tour, we took in a lot of like sponsor or vendors, like deposit money with the accounting office. And so I would kind of, and at the end of the day, a lot of times I would want to hand back a pile of money, have that added to our settlement check. So that's what the cash request was about. Next were the ticket audits. So I don't know why they call it an audit. There's probably a good reason, but ticket audit is the word that we use for the ticket sales report. So it's going to show what's the capacity, what are the sold tickets, what are the unsold tickets, what are the holds, comps, tills, all of that stuff. So whatever you would need for your settlement sheet, typically the box office section of your settlement sheet. I discovered, well, let's see, why did I have these particular times? So 8 o'clock the day before the show, I wanted to get a number then, an accurate sold number, so that the production manager could have an idea of how big to build the site. We were a traveling festival that would have different ranges in attendance, but would have the same amount of stuff every day. So if we haven't sold as many tickets, he makes it smaller. If we've sold a lot of tickets, he makes it bigger. So he really, like, knowing how many tickets were sold is gonna lead him to a big decisions on where do stages go, where does sponsorship go, how is the festival laid out. So 8 o'clock the day before, because it was a general admission show and our buying audience was typically younger, 13 to 19-year-olds, their buying style, which is common for general admission, there's less incentive to buy when tickets go on sale. For a reserve seat show, you're going to see a sales pattern where there is a lot more sales when tickets first go on sale because you're picking a particular seat. General admission, people wait until closer to the date, especially if it's an outdoor thing. Do they have the money? Did they get paid that Friday? Is the weather going to be okay? Are their friends going? Are their parents making them go, out of town that weekend? All of this turns into a buying pattern that is much more heavily weighted to the few days and the weeks leading up to the show. So that day before the show until the morning of the show, we would see a lot of sales during that period, but it's predictable, and we could kind of have a general idea of if it's at 8 o'clock the day before the show, we have a pretty good idea of what that number is going to be 24 hours later. 5 p.m. the day before the show or at the close of business is that kind of shows us what did we do during that day, and will kind of give us an indication also for the same purposes. Ticket audit at 8 a.m. I discovered that if I was not, so my job as the tour accountant weighs much more heavily into the evenings when everybody else is at the post-show barbecue. I'm sometimes still settling the shows. So my day was just shifted a little bit later. So my free time was really in the mornings when I would first wake up, and then I would have, so my kind of personal time would be up until about noon. From noon until 6, they were my transacting hours. So those were the times where bands could come get paid, employees could come ask questions about their paychecks, people could deposit money, whatever transacting was happening. Noon to 6 were my transacting times. At 6, I could then wrap up all of my reporting related to that stuff and transition into settlement mode, like get dinner, FaceTime with the family, and then get into the nuts and bolts of settling the show. It's hard to work on settling the show and having other people come in and have other needs. So it was really like that made it most efficient for the people that are transacting with me to get my attention and be able to handle what they need. And then also to allow me to focus on settling the show, post 6 o'clock. So that means that normally I would not necessarily be awake at 8 o'clock in the morning, especially if the box office didn't open until 9. I learned early on in the tour that Kevin, the tour producer, wanted a number first thing in the morning, but he never told me that he wanted a number first thing in the morning as a general plan. He would just get on the radio and ask for the number. How are ticket sales today? By the way, most tours do not announce ticket sales on the radio. Assume you should not announce ticket sales on the radio. Warped Tour was a special occasion on that front. So he would get on the radio looking for me. I might still be asleep, and then I've got a coworker trying to wake me up, going, "Kevin's looking for you." So once that happened a couple of times, I said, you know what? I should just proactively get a number for him at 8 o'clock and proactively tell him what that number is, and then go about my free time of the morning. So that is why I had the 8 o'clock number. Was I set my alarm for 8. Hopefully that number is in my email box so that I can wake up, look at my email on my phone, turn on my radio for Kevin, let him know what the ticket sales are. And that was literally the start of my day. And then have some downtime before we got into the real rolling of the work. Then we generally like to see what the ticket sales were doing throughout the day. 11 o'clock was usually when doors were opening. So what was the number at that point? 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and then our show went to about 6. So those were kind of getting an idea of how our ticket sales going throughout the day. That was helpful for Kevin. It was helpful for you know, the security, the production staff to understand how many people have purchased tickets to this event or are probably in the grounds. Tied in with that, on the settlement advance, I'm looking at giving information on who's allowed to get information. So the scan count or the drop count, now it's usually a scan or a scan report, is how many people have entered the doors. And our security staff is very interested in that information. So letting the box office know that it's okay to give it to the security person and that she's going to come by, you know, periodically. This is her name. This is, you know, she'll come by, you know, every hour. It's okay to give her that information. Is important to let people know, or else you'll start getting questions of, I got this person asking for a scan count. Am I allowed to do that? I've already told you, yes, that's fine, you know. General box office, when we're keeping the box office open till, we would have years more so like early on when it was more like hard tickets where we would have fake tickets show up, and we would try to track down the source and who's selling those in what parking lot and get that scalper, you know, run off. And then a lot of times we were setting up a temporary box office, which came with its own set of recommendations and best practices that I created some info about for that. Unique to our tour was a very large guest list because we had 800 people on the tour. So we had a guest list tent, knowing where that tent's going to be, who's going to be renting that tent, what time will the tent be set up. And, you know, that was one of the things that I would also talk about when I would check in with the box office manager is anything that is not a ticket sold off your primary system, send them to that tent. So also authorizing that person is allowed to pick up any comp tickets and kind of is allowed to, you know, have box office related information. I'm asking for any withholding notices from anything to be forwarded, and then kind of get into the details of what settlement going to look like. So this is something that is pretty common on many settlement advances is when are you going to want to settle? What kind of documentation are you going to be looking for? We moved to all digital at some point. For a long time, we were still all hard copies. And then we moved to all digital. So, you know, please email me your 50-page ad pack. Don't hand me like a stack of papers this big if you can avoid it. You know, here's what I'm going to provide documentation for. You know, here are the things that might be deducted. Here's how I'm going to want to be paid the balance. Here's the things that are happening with the other payments. And that's pretty much it. So this was settlement advance evolved over time to really like add on the things that I found I was being asked a lot so that I could be proactive with that information. And I think that it was really helpful to the promoters and venues to be able to get all that information up front, know what was kind of what the vision was. And I think that it helped add to it being a smooth day for everybody. So let me see if, I'm not sure how to pull up if there's any questions related to that or not. There must not be, or else it would be alerting me. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at, let me just check off my list. So in advance. Okay, so the next thing that we are going to look at is my Warped Tour, what I created for Warped Tour as a settlement sheet. So we're not going to get into the super nitty gritty of formulas and calculations because we kind of did that in the spreadsheet workshop before. So what I really want to kind of show you is the level of detail that might go into a more complex settlement than the sheet that we created. It's important to note though that the same 4 sections do exist on this sheet and that simpler sheet. So first we're going to have the event information. Second will be box office information. Third, we have the expenses. And then finally we have the artist payment section. So it's the same 4 sections that existed on the other sheet. but just a much higher level of detail. What you want to try to do is create a template that you can use for every situation on that particular tour. So I wouldn't use this, I would not use this sheet for like other smaller tours. It's too complex. It's not what we need for like a club tour, possibly. And it really was refined for the particular tour that I was working on. So I would start with these same components and really look at what's going to be happening on this tour. And ideally come up with a template that then you are going to, at the beginning of the tour, that then you create one for every single show on the tour in the same workbook. And you don't want to be varying it. Consistency is good for a reason that we will get to. So this template in particular on work tour, you can see, well, I'll get to that. Hold on. I got to think about the order that I want to tell the story in. So you probably noticed there's some color formatting on here. For this one, I happen to use blue for my section headings. It really makes the section pop out. I use the grays to distinguish visually, kind of, so you can see the lines going across. So you can see like kind of the groups of information. So otherwise it kind of is so much data, it can look kind of like a jumbly mess and it's hard to keep track of. So that's why I've used kind of the gray color. Pink is conditional formatting, which I will demonstrate a couple of good uses of that. And then there's some green on there that is, for me, visually noting that it is outside of the print area if I was to print this. So the border formatting I use really to distinguish the sections and group information together, with a lot of the goal of this sheet being it needs to be useful for me, it needs to tie in with a summary sheet, and then it also needs to be visually easy for the people that I'm sending a PDF version of it to be able to like visually see and understand. So I'll just on a high level pop over and show you. If I PDF this, I have intentionally formatted it to, unfortunately it goes, it has to go portrait. It cannot, like there's just, it's too much box office data to be able to go landscape. So it prints out, but I made sure it's on 2 pages. I try to keep the breaks, the page breaks lined up with the sections, but that doesn't always work. So there's a page break in the middle of expenses, which isn't the worst thing in the world. But it's nice that it is confined to 2 pages, and it really only has the information that the agent, business manager, tour producer might want to see without my kind of like notes and other calculations. So part of the design of the sheet is for it to be in this format. And whether or not they're printing this out on a letter-sized piece of paper or not, I always send them, and we'll talk about my nightly emails that this goes along with kind of at the end of this section. Even if they're pulling it up on, their computer, it should be in a PDF format so they don't accidentally type over any information. So I wouldn't share my whole workbook unless the person absolutely really needed it. It's the workbook, it's not the finished document. And this is what is the finished document that the people who are not manipulating this information, that's all that they need to see. Okay, so conditional formatting, let's talk about that. So because there is so much stuff on the sheet, and some things apply to only certain situations, or it's easy to forget to do, I have used conditional formatting to remind me to do certain things. So if it's pink, it jumps out at me visually as I need to do something with that cell. So the conditional formatting for this cell, you can go click on the conditional formatting button and look at manage rules. So in this case, it will format the cell to be pink if the cell contains a blank value. So that's my way of saying, make it pink so I remember to type something in it. So in this case, we'll pretend that the promoter is Live Nation. And that's the reason that I wanted to force putting the promoter in. It doesn't really affect the show settlement numbers. So it's an easy thing to overlook putting on the sheet, because you could easily do the whole settlement and not type in who the promoter is and still have you still walk away with a check. So forcing myself to put this in this way made sure that I filled in a blank that could have easily been overlooked otherwise. So when I put in Live Nation, it turns the cell gray. So now that part's done. But because it's Live Nation, I know that on the deal that they had with Live Nation, there's just additional information that I need to collect for whatever reason. So in the case of Live Nation, it was, oh, and you probably couldn't see that. So let me go back and delete that right now. So if you look at sales source, which is right under here under net box office revenue, you can see that that's gray. So for any other promoter, I could type, if I typed in, you know, Jen is the promoter, my sales source is still gray because I don't need to collect the sales source information for those promoters. But for whatever reason, Live Nation, I needed to collect that information. And when I do that, I had set up a conditional formatting that turns that area pink. So now it is, if it says Live Nation in that cell, then it turns all of these cells pink, assuming that I have not balanced that section. So for I won't get into the details of why, but I needed to make sure that all of the tickets were accounted for in one of the sales methods, whether it was outlet, phone, internet, or whatever. So if I did that and balanced and had entered all of the sales, it forces it to go back to being gray. So the way that this formatting worked is I used an AND function. So and that cell equals Live Nation and this other cell equals 0, then turn it pink. So if either of those conditions are not met, if it doesn't say Live Nation or the cell is 0, then it's gray. So it's a way of putting multiple conditions into the formatting. So that is that. So like down here, this comp breakdown, that's pink because whatever the total comps were for the show, the breakdown of it doesn't add up to the same number. So I'm not gonna go, it's the same concept where is this balanced? And if so, it'll be gray. If it's not, then it's showing me an alert kind of that I need to do something to address that to make sure it balances. So big picture, the box office section is probably the part that is most different from my other settlement sheet that I showed you guys. And a lot of the reason for that is there's a lot of different ticket different ticket types, which may or may not be at the same price, but there's different ticket types. And this is all, none of this is warped tour. This is all just made up stuff. And within those types, there might be different things happening with each ticket type. So if I zoom in on this, so you can see that on row 6, I have the name of the ticket type. Row 7, I'm looking at the gross. Then there might be things that are deducted out before the price that's on the audit. So being able to see what is the price on the audit and what was the actual price. Sometimes things like the parking or the facility fee would be built differently on 2 different shows. One show would have put it on top of the audit price and one show would put it included in the audit price. So that's why I have things that can be subtracted out in those 2 specific points. So you see here, parking could be, if it's on top of the audit price, I would subtract it out up there. If it was included in the audit price, I would subtract it out kind of down below that audit price. Same concept with things being taxable or not taxable. So a lot of that has to do with the local taxation rules. And reminder, the tax that we're talking about here is not a sales tax, it's an entertainment tax, amusement tax, which is just a whole different tax system and structure. And that tax is usually included in the ticket price. So if you go to buy a $40 concert ticket, that's gonna include whatever the tax is. So as a consumer, you really don't see that number. But on the back end, we need to figure out what is taxable and then calculate the tax from there. So in some places, the charity, if we had 25 cents on for each ticket for charity, in some places that charity was taxed. In other places, it was not taxed. Sometimes we would have upsells of a commemorative ticket or a CD or whatever, and there would be different rules on, okay, it's included in the ticket, so we have to subtract out the tax here. Or in other places, they would say, we can just subtract the full amount out, and then whoever's getting that revenue can pay the tax directly. So a lot of it had to do with what are the rules related to taxes in the municipalities of that particular show. So building up a situation where I can be easily flexible. And a lot of settlement is, oh, wait, is that 25 cents coming out before the tax or after the tax? And being able to very quickly shift where I'm putting that number without having to figure out like, oh, I got to go change the whole formula in the cell, is key to being able to settle kind of efficiently. And one of the things about that is I just completely lost my train. Something popped up down at the bottom and I completely lost my train of thought. What was my other thought on that? I don't know. I hate it when that happens. Okay, so all of this leads to what is the net. Oh, I know. I remembered. I think it's important on spreadsheets when you are visually presenting information, especially when people aren't going to be able to see what is inside the cells, the more that you can have that information visually represented rather than having numbers buried inside formulas inside the cells helps people understand how a calculation came about. So having a column for the rates and then each dollar amount is using that rate to calculate. So, you know, if I had an other fee of $1, I put the rate in there, and then this cell is calculating if that applies to that ticket, it would be $1. If I decided, oh, you know what, that other fee doesn't apply to the early bird ticket, then I just delete it out of that one. So having it built so that you can have a template where you can adjust those things per show on the fly and very visually see, okay, this other fee, which ticket types does it apply to, without having to dig inside the cell and try to decipher a calculation, I think is really helpful when you are settling so that you can see what's going on, but then also for whoever you're sending the sheet to understand what's happening. So the big picture box office, I have a different column for each ticket price because there's so many or different ticket types. Whereas on the previous sheet we looked at in the spreadsheets workshop had a row for each ticket type because everything was dealt more as a whole, where this is breaking out each individual little thing. So just additional calculations so that I can see every possible, what do I need to see for balancing to the promoter on what the gross of the show is, and then anything that needs to be subtracted out, like taxes or whatever, and then what's the net of the show. So the net being the number that now that's our starting point to addressing expenses and then what we're gonna split. So things that are subtracted out before the net are not part of like that artist split amount. Other things I kept track of on the box office was the comp breakdown, the paid numbers for this year, last year, day of show, what's the percentage change. These things came about because people would ask me, you know, the agent and the tour producer would ask things like, how did we do last year on the day of show? So having that information at my fingertips without having to open last year's settlement workbook and find the show was a thing that I built at the beginning of the tour. So at the beginning of the tour, I would set up this workbook for the entire tour and take last year's show number and paste it into the place so that it would show up as last year's show number, etc. And like I said, all of these numbers on here, I just threw in numbers, they're imaginary. So information on the sales for the day, other related information when I might be asked, how did we do last year? What was the walkout last year? The next section is the expenses section, and this is certainly an area that I think that it's important to decide what expense line items you're going to have, and then for the entire tour, those are the only ones you're using. I don't like adding on rows in the middle of the tour. So really having an idea up front of what are the expenses you're going to see and how can you fit any wackadoo thing that pops up into them. So equipment rental is a good example. So I also have forklifts. I would put generators under power, but let's say we had sometimes we would have misting tents. That's equipment rental. It's equipment that's been rented, but it's kind of a miscellaneous category, but it's specific to equipment. So thinking through what are those things that especially we might want to compare from show to show, and having a consistency on what your line items are, I think is important. So in our main fixed expense section, you see we have the budget. I would then put in the actual. It'll show me the difference. And I always have a place to add in notes, because if the difference is really big from what was budgeted, I'm going to demonstrate that I have asked why and gotten an answer on why it is different. Now, some things like catering might have a bunch of different receipts and components to them. That's where I have little breakout sections. So for catering over here, I might have, donuts, ice, what the runner had to go get. There could be a whole bunch of different things that will more easily be viewed in a breakout section. And then the total, I would just link the total over here. I would just, for catering, I would do equals and then grab that total. So if this was like donuts, and let's say they cost $100, we were buying lots of donuts. So then we can see over here, maybe we had budgeted $50, and that's showing me that, we've gone over budget on the donuts, or over budget in the catering, and then I can bop over here and see, oh, it was because donuts were $100 and we'd only budgeted $50 for catering or whatever. So same thing with the miscellaneous. And then especially as marketing has evolved over time, having a much more detailed breakdown of where the marketing spend is happening. And then I had some things related to like who is paying for stuff. Is the tour paying for it, or is the local promoter paying for it? So having that broken out into categories so that we could track that over time and provide that to our marketing people after the tour, even for them to be able to see what's happening for the next year. So having little places to break stuff down. And then fixed expenses generally are defined by, doesn't matter how many tickets you've sold, the price is the price. Now, that doesn't mean that you're, for instance, like, what's a good example? Let's say we find out the ticket sales are not very good. Well, that might affect the number of porta potties that need to be rented. So, but still the porta potty invoice price is the price. So it might be affected by ticket sales in the sense of we're not going to order as many porta potties, but come the day of the show, you either have 60 porta potties on site or you don't, right? Variable expenses vary based directly on the ticket sales. So credit card charges, insurance is a per head calculation. The license fees of ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, those are all calculated based on either the net revenue or the number of people that are in attendance. So those are directly tied to ticket sales as part of the calculation. So those are variable expenses. So I've got that set up so that I can see how is it being calculated, what is the rate, in case we need other multipliers, but the same thing, kind of all of this then adds up into our total expenses. And then I kind of always like to build in a place for, because what we're doing is I'm going to sit there and the promoter is giving me information, and I need to make sure that I have gotten all of the information and that we are agreeing. So settlement is the process of agreeing. So having a place where the promoter says, oh, well, I have, $104 as the total expenses, and I can put that in the balance to promoter, and I can see, oh, we're off by $4. Now we need to go find that $4. So a lot of settlement is finding the $4. And 1 cent is ideally the amount that you are off with the promoter. Anything beyond that is unacceptable and you're not balancing. The 1 cent is fine because Mac computers and PC computers will sometimes round slightly differently, and you will end up with, it's not that they round differently, something happens where it's okay to be off 1 cent, and it's almost always because one of us has a Mac and one of us has a PC. Anything else, there's a typo, there's an error, there's a piece of paper that has not been handed to me or that has gotten entered twice. There's something that we need to go back through, and we read through all the numbers, and check off all of the things until we agree on those amounts to make sure that we are on exactly the same page. So at some point that becomes 100, the balance, the difference is 0. We are happy that we have balanced. And then we can, you know, we make sure we're balanced on the box office section also. And then we can move on to the artist payment calculations. So again, totally imaginary numbers in here, but I have a place that I, in the middle, have built in so I can see very easily what the deal structure is. Is it versus, what is the percentage? Is there a guarantee? Is there a sliding scale? There happen to be a sliding scale, maybe. So that's an overview. I can see the deal structure, and then that's going to tie into the actual artist payment calculation over on the left, where we're pulling, it's the same thing as the artist payment calculation on the spreadsheets workshop. Pulling the net box office revenue number from above, pulling the expenses from above. That's going to lead us to what we have left to share, what percentage is due to the tour, if there's any subtractions, comparing that to the guarantee to see what is the total amount due the tour, which would equate to the total due artist on the other spreadsheet. Then there's going to be some potentially, that's what's due the tour, but now we might have some adjustments to arrive at how much does the check actually need to be written for. So things that might be deducted, if there was a deposit paid in advance, if I took any cash, if there were show chargebacks. A show chargeback would be like at the beginning of the tour, if we had rehearsal expenses, that is not the show cost of the first show, that is a tour expense. So that those full costs would be charged back to the tour. Sometimes bands on the tour would get choose to get a runner vehicle, but the band's going to pay for the runner vehicle. The tour is not paying for that. So that would be a charge back to the tour, and then the tour would charge the band. Withholding taxes, there's 6 states that have non-resident entertainer withholding tax, which I think we talked about in the tour budget workshop with Mike Yanasek. So in those states, a withholding tax is withheld. Sometimes we had tickets that were on consignment. So you could go to a Journey store and buy a Warped Tour ticket at the Journey store. Those tickets had been all like pulled from the ticketing system, sent to Journeys. Journeys had the money, so it was, they were being sold on consignment, separate from the ticketing system. So that just had to be accounted for, that we needed to get that consignment money, that we had the consignment money via Journeys or whoever, that it was not being held by the promoter. There might be some additions. If there was production reimbursement, if there were upsells on the tickets, like a commemorative ticket or some merchandise, if the tour needed to be reimbursed for a marketing spend, if there was a bonus or any other thing. So having plenty of spaces to be able to clearly see what are the adjustments between the total due the tour and what you're actually writing the check. Again, a balanced promoter. And then over here to the right, because of the uniqueness of the situation, I have a place to put any show chargebacks to itemize out those, any band chargebacks to itemize out those, who is the band, what do they owe us for, how much, and then any withholding tax details. So that completes the portion of the sheet that would then get printed out and sent along with my nightly email. The nightly emails, so then I have below that, I had 3 separate emails that I would send out every night. One would be my settlement email. So I created this form that I could that is grabbing information from up above, because remember, you only want to type things in once, and then you always want to link to it. It's going to streamline all of your processes. So the date, I'm not going to retype the date, it's grabbing the date from up above. So everything that's going to go into my settlement email that is the overview that people were looking for, along with a printout of the settlement sheet, I already had built in there, and so it would automatically populate. So I would just like copy that, paste it into the email. I had a group set up that was nightly settlement email, and it had the agent, the manager, the business manager, the tour producer, whoever else needed that was built as a group. So rather than having to find those 4 emails every day, paste that in, print out a PDF of my settlement sheet, attach that as a PDF, so that when the end with a good subject line, with the show, the city, and the date, so that when they wake up in the morning, they have the show recap that they're looking for. The second email that I would send out was an attendance email, and that was sponsors needed to know what the attendance was, our merchandise people needed to know what the attendance was, our production and security people needed to know what the attendance was, but they didn't need all this financial information. So I would send a separate email that just showed the paid, the comp, and the total, and the drop count. And then those people, all the people that was on that group, they just took out the number that they needed from that small bit of information. The other thing that I developed to start sending out was in an answer questions before they get asked sort of way, along with the tour producers, 8 a.m., what are ticket sales? Frequently, his second question would be, how did we do on day of show walk-up last year? And that would then require me to get out my computer and find the thing and do this, and it feels like a scramble, right? So I thought, you know what, I'm gonna give him this information before he asks me for it. So I created an email that I called today's count, which would show what is the current count at the end of the day, what was last year's paid, what was last year's day of show sales, and if there was a bonus structure, what was that bonus point. And that went out to a different group of people. Some of them overlapped on these other emails, but that went to the people that needed to know what's happening tomorrow. And it was my way of letting them know before they asked me the questions that they were beginning to routinely ask me. So those were that's my settlement sheet. Let me check. I think we went through all of the things I wanted to cover on that. Oh, but we have not gotten to the settlement workbook. So I got a question. As extensive as this spreadsheet is this settlement sheet common for a tour manager or accountant to use regardless of the tour show size? I think it's really specific to large shows. And the thing about it that's specific is the multiple ticket types. That's something that you will definitely see when you've got so many pre-sales these days, where this group gets a pre-sale, that group gets there's all these pre-sales. So even though the tickets might all be $30, they're different ticket types. And so you're getting ticket reports from the box office that to take their format of information and put it into your format and make sure it's all accurate. Having a really detailed box office section becomes essential for any theater, arena, stadium, amphitheater tour. So this would not be, like, you don't need that box office section for a general admission 1,000-seat club, right? Where you might have 2 or 3 ticket types, and they're not going to have different things subtracted out of them. The spreadsheet workshop and the settlement sheet in that one, much better fit for that situation. The date on your spreadsheet, was it modeled off of another settlement spreadsheet, or was it all added over time based on what you felt was important information? Well, in the last 25 years, I have created a whole bunch of different settlement spreadsheets based on the information. So it is a combination of what do I know people want to see? And that's just something that, you know, at some point when you're starting out, somebody will go, here is the sheet that I want you to use. And you'll start using it and you'll go, you know what? I understand you want all this information. I'm going to rebuild this sheet in a way that it functions better for me, but also gives you the information that you want. So when I was at Jam Productions in Chicago, built completely different settlement sheet for being on the promoter side. That needed to tie in the promoter paying things by check or paying things by cash. The accounting office needed a different information. Working on a theater tour, I was filling in for 3 weeks on, you know, a tour, and you know, I said, I'm just going to use your sheet because I'm just filling in. Like, I'm not going to redesign anything. I won't want to mess up the system you've already got going. So I'm just going to dive in with what you're doing. So I inherited a settlement sheet from Warped Tour. So I had some understanding of, like, I certainly didn't delete any data off of there, but then added on the things that I knew that I was going to need over time. And I want to say it was year 3 or 4 that I did the settlement sheet redesign. And part of that was you have to live with it for a little bit and see what's working, what's not working, and what needs to be changed. Okay, so that I answered live. Hi, 5-1. Thanks for asking a question. The person you're settling with, do you add their email and mobile number to your spreadsheet? I do, well, I have a place for their name, which I really should put conditional formatting on, because I almost always would fail to fill that one in, because it's one of those things that you don't have to fill in to have it be, you know, a complete settlement, right? It's easy to like skip over that one. I think it's nice to have the name on there so that you know who did you, if you have questions to go back to. So yes, I think that especially if you're new to, so part of this is I had settled with the same people year after year, and I already had their emails from earlier in the process. So I did not have a need to really put their contact information on the sheet, but it would be a helpful thing to have on there, because if you do have questions that pop up later, then you have an easy reference for contacting that person. Okay, so that's done, that's done. Stacy says, this is all new to me, so I'm watching to just dip my feet in. I'm not surprised when I start in the industry. My question is, where would I start to understand everything that is needed on these tour sheets, and how would I know what to calculate? Well, Stacy, I've got some workshops on that for you. So if you go to my website, jenkellogg.com, I really tried to build these workshops in as best of a linear order as I could. So the first one that you should watch is how an idea becomes a tour. That's going to give you an overview of all the steps in the process. I love this stuff, so I pretty quickly dig into deals, which talks about the promoter profit calculation and the versus calculation. And those are the things that are the deal structures that you're seeing here. After the deals, I do a spreadsheet workshop that really talks about a much more basic version of this sheet and how to put the promoter profit and the versus deals into a settlement sheet. So that's where I recommend you start with. If you're just digging in, those kind of try to go through my workshops in order, because this one does not fall into the basics category quite as much. Oops, cancel, type, I want to answer live. Oh, and Anonymous appreciates my insight, and thanks for answering the questions. Anonymous, you're welcome. It is my pleasure. And 5-1, can you explain the drop and where you find it on your ticket audit? Yes, so the drop count, it used to be back when we had hard tickets that were like rectangles. Remember, there was a stub, and when you would walk through the ticket taker would rip the ticket and drop the stubs into a box. Someone would literally count how many stubs were dropped. So now that has become interchangeable with the term scan, and it is usually, so it's a number that you're just entering in. It's not a calculation. It is like just a hard number. Mine is, oh, I'm sorry, I should have answered this question as well. That was screen sharing, but I got distracted. So I have it in the day's summary to put the drop count number in. Why it's important is or the scan number, you're going to use it to calculate your general liability insurance. Most places it's 55 cents a head for general liability insurance on the drop, which is the number of people in attendance, whether they have paid or gotten a ticket for free. So if you don't have that number, then you'll use the total of the paid and comp number. The other reason that the drop or scan number is important and relevant is it can give you an idea of if there has been any irregularities in the box office situation. So if I got a drop of 888, but I have total paid and comp of 11,000, something is wrong. Like the drop count almost always should fall kind of in between the paid number and the total. Not everybody shows up that buys a ticket, but most people that paid did, and some of the people with comp tickets will show up. So usually the number, for one thing, if the drop is higher than the total, that's weird and tells you there's funny business in the box office and the promoter is somehow selling tickets that aren't being reported in the ticket report. So that's a red, and it's unfortunate, but that happened. We came from the beginning of our industry maybe sometimes did not have the most ethicalness involved on all sides of everything. So a lot of settling shows is verifying accuracy and making sure people aren't screwing you. I think that that has primarily changed over time. I think there's a lot more honesty and a lot more upfrontness, and digital ticketing systems, of course, are going to assist in that. There's still certainly ways to kind of like fiddle with them. But so the drop counters can be used as kind of a red flag of, is there some funny business going on that needs to be looked into further? Now, it might be in this case, if I go and say, hey, why was the drop 800 and we had 1,100 tickets sold? They would probably come to me and say, you know what, our scanners broke. One of our scanners broke. 7 out of our 8 scanners wouldn't scan. We couldn't get connected to the internet. Scanner problems are the #1 reason that like the drop is, or the scan count is not what you're expecting it to be. So there was a green section outside the print format. Does that any data being referenced to the main sheet? Thank you for asking, Joey. You're right. I did not address that. So what that was balancing a complex box office to the promoter. The number that they're looking at, you got to sometimes do some calculations to make the number on your sheet to compare apples to apples. That's what I'm trying to get at. They're looking at apples, you're looking at oranges. You need to make sure you're talking about apples to apples. So this is kind of my big balance to promoter. Ultimately, we're trying to balance the bottom number, but trying to get to that bottom number, there might be trying to figure out where you're off. Is the ticket price wrong? Is the quantity of a ticket wrong? Is it that we're subtracting something out of a ticket price wrong? Are we have the tax calculated correctly? So when we can go through and balance out to, you see on all of the deductions, do we agree on the taxable amount? Do we agree on the tax? Do we agree on the charity amounts? Do we agree on the parking fee, the facility fee? So if we're trying to balance to a very complicated big number, being able to along the way balance to smaller numbers, that's what that green section was for. Great questions, everybody. And I think that we are moving on now. All right, so the next thing I want to show you on settlement sheets is, so we've looked at a sheet for one show. It's ideal that all the shows for your tour are in the same workbook. The reason for that is so that you can create a summary sheet that will be able to pull information from each of those sheets, so that when you're asked, like, how many tickets have we sold to date on the tour? You don't have to go open up 10,000 different sheets. That information is all there, so you just copy that column of information, paste it in the email, and off you go. So to get to that point, you'll see in this workbook, I've got Oak Park is today's show, and then I have the gen sheet. That's the summary sheet. The reason I always named that the gen sheet rather than summary was it was like, nobody touches this with me. Do not mess with my gen sheet. It is, so the way that once you have created your one template, so at this point, if I was using this as a template, I would delete out all of the show specific information. So I would, out that it's in Oak Park, I would delete out the date. The day of the week is tied to the date in there, so it's able to calculate. So if we were doing this on June 30th, that's a Tuesday. But I would, some of the stuff, like the show time was supposed to be the same at every show, so I might leave that. But basically, I would delete out all of the show-specific information. Notice it turns pink because that's information that needs to be put in, and there's my conditional formatting reminder. So I would delete out all of that, all of the tickets. It would just be blank. It would be a blank. All it would be is formulas. And then I would come down to that tab, and I would right-click or do whatever version of right-click you have. On a Mac, it's Control. So if you have Control, you hit the Control button and the trackpad button, it provides a pop-up menu of options, one of which is move or copy. So I would then do move or copy. I would click create a copy, and I'm going to want it to go in between Oak Park and Jen. So I'm going to say that, and then it puts a duplicate in there. I would then go in and change that to be Chicago, and now I have a duplicate sheet that's got the exact same template. None of that's going to change, and I can go in and then put my you know, this one's at the high school, and the promoter is Mike, and it's in Chicago, and whatever other information. You know, tickets here were $20. There was no parking, or the parking, this would have already been blank, but add in what you need to add in. So let's say you've done that, but then you're like, oh no, I have a typo on the word, let's pretend I have a typo on the word permits, or I don't want it to be permits anymore on that line, I want it to be something else. Let's say you have 40 sheets, and you're like, oh, I don't want to have to go click on 40 sheets and change this in 40 different places. Like, because I made a template, every sheet is the same, I want to change it across the board. So you can use your shift. So you get your first sheet selected. So I got Oak Park selected. I'm going to hold down shift and click on Chicago. And now you can see that both of those tabs are white. So both of those sheets are selected. So now I'm going to scroll down to the thing that I want to change. And I'm going to change permits to cars, which is not the thing, but it's just easy. And I'm going to make that yellow, just to demonstrate my point. So I'm going to click away from those to unselect those sheets. But then if I go back to Oak Park, I see that line 80 says cars in yellow. And if I go over to Chicago, I see line 80 says cars in yellow. So that is a great way to, after the fact, on a template, make a change across the board. Now, why is it so important that these are all identical? That's where the gen sheet comes in. So the gen sheet is, which feel free to call yours the gen sheet too if you want, but you probably want to use the word summary or your name or whatever. So what it is, I had taken this information out of here, so I got to put it back in, sorry. Back over on the Oak Park, the venue is house. Okay, well, I can't type. So on the gen sheet, this is creating, the rows are replicated, but typically this would be one row for each of your shows, so that all of your information is from all of your individual show spreadsheets ends up on one big settlement summary. So a line for each row, and it literally has a column for every bit of information from that settlement sheet. So this goes on like pretty far. So we start with the show information, city, venue, promoter, weather. Next, we have the box office information. So what's nice about this is you could have a quick visual on what is the box office to date. What is the tax to date? You can see all of that box office information, those summary cells that would be, they're all linked here. After box office, I have the artist payment stuff, any additions to the artist payment. I can, like the sun is, I shouldn't have to do this to look at my computer. Oh, you know what? The brightness went down. The walkout. So what was the total amount that was made? The promoter's profit or loss, sales source, and being able to compare this stuff over shows is interesting. So in this one particular case, the phone sales were doing great on this tour, right? But it'll show you, are there sales patterns that are different in different places? Why is this tour, why is this market buying all of their tickets at the primary box office? Something interesting must be going on there. So the comp breakdown, what were the paid numbers for this year, last year, and 3 years ago? So this is where I would frequently get asked, what is the, tour to date total paid? And they want to see it broken down by show. So I can just copy that, paste it into an email. And so it literally has everything. That's a whole bunch of advertising stuff. Oh, I guess I got to the end. Oh, because these have like wide things in the way I'm moving through them. So every single expense item has a column. And then we can look at and go like, well, what were fencing costs looking like, and is there an anomaly? It's a way of being able to look at a particular line item's cost across the shows in a very easy way. So this is my biggest recommendation, is the way that this functions is by creating a template so that you can link to, and it takes a while to build all this. This is not like a quick process, but in the beginning of each tour, it takes a little while to get this workbook set up. Like not like weeks or anything. But I mean, it's like a multi-hour project. So getting this all set up in advance makes the rest of the tour run so much more smoothly. Okay, so that's it for my settlement related stuff to tell you about. Is my sheet locked? Well, it doesn't need to be because I don't send it to people. So I really try to avoid sending even the business manager the sheet until the end of the tour. And if I do send it to him, I'm going to send him a version of it. I'm not going to send him or her a link to one that we could edit at the same time. I want to make sure, so otherwise, yes, I would lock it. And so if I was doing this in, if it was in a way that was file sharing, I would be sure to, for sure, lock this sheet. I do not want anybody messing with this sheet. And then also you can lock cells within a sheet. So if you are collaborating with somebody and they need access to it as well, and maybe they do need to alter some of the stuff, but you don't want them fucking with your format and your template, then you lock, I think you can lock all of the cells and then just unlock the ones you want people to have access to. So understanding who's using it and in what context is key. And so one of the reasons I like doing it in Excel and having it just, it's saved, I mean, it's backed up, but it's not in a file sharing way, is that I know I have the accurate version of that sheet. Okay, so we are going to move on to tour budgets. Why isn't it? Okay, so on the tour budgets workshop, on the first one, we looked at the format that Frank, my guest, used, and he had inherited from somebody. It might be somewhat surprising to you that I have not actually personally budgeted tours for an artist. Budgeted lots of other stuff. I've budgeted tours for a promoter where it was staging and forklifts and generators and fencing that we were carrying with us, and electricians and site coordinators, and so I budgeted things. Budgeted lots of shows, but I just have not been in a situation where I've worked directly for an artist doing the tour budget. So that is to say that I have not used this sheet for its function, and I need to give credit where credit is due. This is adapted from a sheet that's in a thing called The Tour Book by Andy Reynolds, which is a really great resource that I'm going to recommend on my blog. It is written in a comfortable first-person voice, very easy to read, and it is intended for people that are kind of getting in the van for the first time to get out on the road touring. So for artists that are kind of just getting started. So this was the format that he had on there, and there's just things about it that I really love, and I think that could be adapted to larger tours as well. So if I was to be budgeting a tour, I would start with this. I added some things on of my own, and so this top stuff, I think, actually is the stuff that I added on. And what we're looking at here is really the expense side of the tour budget. It's not really looking at the revenue potential. There would probably be another sheet to better outline that. So what I like about this is it shows as much information as possible, and it makes it so that you can play with the information to try out different scenarios very easily. So in the concept of color coding things, the things that color coded blue, you would type in an actual number. The things that are color coded green in this particular situation are things that are formulas that you should not type over. So in the idea of putting information into a sheet once and then using it in multiple places without retyping it is going to lead to more accuracy. So that's why I've built some of this way. So let's say we have 2,500 tour miles, And let's say we have 4 artists, and let's say that we're on tour for 14, we have 10 show days and 14 tour days. So right there, that's not, none of the rest of the sheet has formulas built into it yet, but those are the things that anytime we need those bits of information, we're gonna go grab that cell. So let's look at, so the overview of this sheet is it's organized by categories. So you can see that we have wages, we then have per diems, hotel, transportation, production vendors, other, and then commissions and contingency. So it hits on all the categories that need to be thought about for any size tour. Within the category is going to be whatever items you need to have. So let's say we have a tour manager, let's say it's Jen Kellogg, we'll put that in the additional information. For all of these categories, if you look at row 9, these are the column headings for all the categories that fall below. So we're gonna have column E is where we're gonna put in the rate, and then we're gonna have 2 multipliers. There's at least space for 2 multipliers in case you need it, but what you're multiplying might change. So in the case of Jen Kellogg, I'm totally making up numbers. Let's say Jen has a weekly rate of $1,000. For a big tour, it would be way too low. The daily rate would then be the weekly rate divided by 7, right? So now we have a daily rate. You get paid every single day you're on the tour, whether there's a show or not. So our first multiplier is going to be the number of tour days. So I'm gonna go grab that cell for the number of tour days. Oh, I'm sorry, put that in the wrong place. I made subheadings just for the wages section. So the quantity of tour managers, we have 1 tour manager. And then the number of days links to the number of tour days. That is then going to calculate to the item total, which is how much does it cost to have Jen Kellogg for her wages on the tour, and then those items all add up into a category total. So if we were doing, let's say we had 2 van or bus drivers, sometimes they are a weekly rate or a daily rate, so maybe we know they're making $250 a day. Let's say there's 2 of those, and then we're gonna also go grab that number of tour days, again, 14 days. We'll then take how many drivers a driver makes how much per day, how many of them are making that every day, and then how many days are they making that. So that's where you sometimes have to multiply it by a couple of different things. Another good example of that is in, why can't I find the fuel? Oh, there it is. So let's, on the topic of fuel. The rate for a van is, I might have told you a different one when we were talking about tour budgets before, but let's say it's 45 cents per mile for van fuel. The first multiplier would be, or let's do up here, how many buses do we have? We have 2 buses. So let's say it's 90 cents per mile per mile driven. So then the first multiplier is how many vehicles are driving each one of those miles. That would equal our number of buses. And then how many miles is each of those vehicles driving? That would equal our total tour miles. So those 2 calculations, sorry, the Q&A thing is in the way of what I'm looking at, show us then what our total fuel would be. So really thinking about how to end up with that item total and then being able to visually break it down is important in your thought process. The reason that it's great to do it this way is, let's say the agent has had to reroute the tour. Now we have 3,000 tour miles. I update that once and it updates it in every place that's relevant. Oh, also, instead of 14 days, we're going to be on the road for 16 days. And that's going to affect the number of the pay. But I don't have to, once I have all this stuff built in the main body of this, I don't have to go back and update the number of days in every single little place that it falls. That's why it's really important to put the information in once, then you can easily change it. And if you're playing with different scenarios, maybe you're doing some estimates for somebody. So here's what it will look like if we have 2,500 miles and we're on the road for 14 days versus here's what it's going to look like if we're on the road for 16 days and have 3,000 miles. So thinking about, you know, hotel rooms and whether you're getting full rooms or people are sharing rooms, what are the room prices, how many people need rooms, all of that. Do they only need them on days off or do they need them on every day? So really thinking through on each of these line items, how to get to what that total is. It really also helps to have that laid out rather than all built inside a cell because it's easier to update. So that's kind of what I wanted to show you, just like on the functionality of that sheet. And that covers what I wanted to tell you about tour budgets. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is info sheets. Like I said on Warped Tour, a lot of people. Everybody's got the same questions. You know what? People are not very original. I have some kids, and if you ever take a 2-year-old through an airport, they're going to want to pull the suitcase, and every single person that you walk past will go, you know, we got child labor laws in this country. And it'll also make you realize that most of the stuff that I say that I think is funny, clearly people hear all of the time. So it just demonstrates that people are not original. Everybody's having the same thought frequently. And a lot of times those thoughts are, when am I going to get paid? So, or how am I going to get paid? Or when is it per diem day today? Or why do I have so many taxes withheld from my paycheck? So it was obvious to me very early on that if I did not proactively give people information, I was going to be constantly asked the same questions, and nobody enjoys that. So solution is create some info sheets. So let's see, the first one we're going to look at was my tour manager info sheet. So this is where this applies to Warped Tour and may not apply to anything else, but I just want you to see kind of what my thought process was on stuff. So this, all of the tour managers had to check in on the first day and they would get the sheet, and this was the how you get paid. And the tour managers on Warped Tour, some of them got hired 2 days before. Some of them had been with the band for years. Some of them, it was their first time ever tour managing. Some were very experienced. There was a wide range of knowledge as showing up in front of my desk. So to level the playing field on all of that, everybody gets the same information. I've got a system and a process. So here's how to get your band paid. Here's what our week looks like. Here are your options. You can have cash, check, or wire. If you want cash, you must show up between noon and 6. I will give you shit if you show up after that or before that, because I have given you a piece of paper that has told you what my transaction hours are. Now, my question will be, do you need the payment in order to buy gas to get to the next show, but it's 8 o'clock at night? Okay, fine. I will go get the money out of my safe and pay you because I am not a terrible human. I want you to get to the next show. Please show up between noon and 6 tomorrow. And a lot of that sounds really rigid, but when you're doing things on a large volume, you create a process and a system and have to stick to it in order for all of the parts to fit together. So I'm sure people thought that I was super annoying, but it was the way that I made sure that all the stuff happened. So there were the options on how to get paid. Here's some information on when we're going to be withholding taxes from you. You know, and if you have questions, here's the contact information. So that was my tour manager one. The one people would seriously show up on site and be like, do we get per diems today? And I'll be like, we're at the hotel. Like, we're not even at the show yet. No, you don't get per diems the second that you arrive. So anyway, no, this was something that I was like, get the people the info, because it is important. People should know when to expect their money. And then you should be accurate on following through with that. So letting them know, here's the pay period, start and end dates. Related to that pay period, when are you going to be able to pick up the per diem in cash? When are you going to be able to pick up your paycheck or expect a direct deposit? And then answering the varieties of pay-related questions that I got over time. So at one point we were using CAPS as it's like a payroll service. So people would be like, why does it say that I'm employed by CAPS? And I'd be, well, technically you are, even though you work for the Warped Tour, that's who's handling it. It's the whole thing. What is the per diem? You are taxed on your per diem in this particular situation, whether you take it in cash or have it on your check. And then the biggest question that I got, and this I think is really common for people that work on tours, especially if they're new to working on tours, to understand just in general, payroll systems, they don't understand that you're working on this tour for 2 months. They think that payroll systems, the way the withholding taxes are built into it, assume that you have a full-time normal salaried job. So you might make a ton of money in 2 months and then not work for a while. The payroll system does not understand that. So it's going to withhold taxes based on the idea that you are going to make the salary like all year round. So that sometimes can cause a lot more taxes to be withheld than are actually due. And you know, what you have withheld on your paycheck is just withheld. It's not what's owed. And then when you file your taxes, that's what you're actually paying. So this addressed questions of, you know, related to that. So I got lots of questions. I mean, there was one guy that for 8 years, I think, he showed up asking me to explain why like the taxes were how they were. And he was an artist, so love him to death. Math was not his strong suit. Happy to pleasantly explain this over and over, but at least to be able to provide the information up front was really helpful, and I think really cut down on the questions. So also how you're going to get your paycheck. So those were just the specific things that I found I was getting asked a lot. So this might not make sense on a smaller tour, might have all of this built into Master Tour. If you're using that software, I don't even know, but there might be some way to get people this information another way. The last info sheet starts our conversation about my bus driver processes. So on Warped Tour, we had frequently like 22 production buses. So none of the artists all had their own vehicles. Like we had hundreds and hundreds of vehicles on that tour. The parking, the backstage parking was about the same size as the actual festival site. It was always neat to see pictures from up above to see like hundreds of tour buses and vans and bandwagons parked. But of those, production and a lot of sponsors, there was like 22. And we had used a bus broker who then would get between 1 or 2 or 5 or 6 buses from a bunch of different bus companies. So that bus broker kind of dealt individually with the bus companies, and and so this might be something that is very much more specific to Warped, but I found all of these processes to be really efficient, and everybody got on board with them. Sometimes, I don't want to generalize about bus drivers, but sometimes change took them longer to adapt to changes in processes, but ultimately I got everybody on board with the system, and they didn't really have a choice. So whether they liked it or not, that's what we were doing. So we would start out with a bus driver meeting, just to get everybody on the same page. And I would literally read them this entire sheet. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. But basically we would have a bus captain. They would be in charge of the bus. Please play nice. If you have problems, bring the problems to us sooner rather than later. Payroll, they also got a payroll sheet. Payment, and this is the part that we'll get to that we kind of did a little bit differently, is bus drivers have the opportunity to get paid for extra services. If there's long drives, if they need to do a generator service, interior clean, exterior clean, and do the linens, do the sheets. So those services, I created a different system on how those get paid. So we will come back to that. That's most of what we're going to talk about. And then I outlined how the float process works. So float is money that is given in advance and then to be used for gas, fuel, additives, toilet paper, whatever bus needs. They can then have cash to buy those things and then turn the receipts into me. And then I would then, let's say they had $1,000 of float and they had $700 worth of receipts. they still have $300 in their pocket. They turn in their $700 of receipts. I give them back $700 in cash. So now they are back to having $1,000 float. And at the end of the tour, they give me back the $1,000 in either cash or receipts on the very, very final day. So that whole process, what's allowed to be turned in, how I want it turned in, love these bus drivers. But sometimes I would get handed stuff like at just times a day that it was like, now I'm carrying around like this float envelope. Like, I need a system for how I'm getting all of this information effectively and then getting it back to them in a timely way. So really laid out the float process, service and repairs. If a service needs to be done, really we got to try to do it on a day off, and you got to drop people at the hotel first. So things, a lot of the info sheets is things you wouldn't think that you need to say, but a thing happens at some point and now you need to say it. And so it's better to say it up front. So just kind of outlining that. They're receiving one of those easy pass transponders. There's a fee if you lose it. And damages. Oh, least favorite thing at the end of the tour is the day before the last show, somebody shows up going, well, I've had this thing broken by the bus riders and it's been broken since the first week of tour, but we really got to figure out who's going to pay for this. Tell me when it happens so we can figure out who's going to pay for it. Sometimes that takes a lot longer than you would think. Stuff like a tent goes flying over and scrapes up the side of a bus, like a 10 by 10 tent scrapes up the side of a bus. Now the bus needs a new paint job or something like that. Has happened a number of times on work tour, or at least once. Now we got to track down, like, whose fault is it? Did the person not tie their tent down? Was it a weather related dramatic problem? We need to get an estimate on what this is going to cost to get repaired. Yeah, maybe we need a second estimate. Does it really need to repaint the entire bus? Is there a way to kind of, so there's a lot of sometimes things that weren't really anybody's fault that still have to get paid for, and figuring out who's going to pay for them. Let's have plenty of time to do that. So that's why we address damages. Okay, so that's the bus driver info sheet. What they get along with that is a bus checklist. So this is their checklist. So typically those services that I outlined, interior clean, exterior clean, linens, generator service. Before I created this system, drivers, when they would do it, would write out like a handwritten receipt and include it on their float envelope. In theory, they're supposed to be doing and charging for these services once a week. Sometimes on this tour, we would have had 2 generator services. It averaged out to 1.5 generator services a week. So I should see a charge for 1 service 1 week, 2 charges the next week, 1 week, 1 the next week, 3rd week, etc. I quickly noticed with 22 buses and 22 drivers doing this on whatever willy-nilly schedule they feel like, there was no good way for me to effectively keep track of if they were charging me for the right things. So this was my way of verifying that we're getting charged once a week for the things that we're supposed to. And I really view it as, you have an opportunity to earn these services, but you should only be charging us if you do the service. So if you didn't do the linens that week, you should not be charging for linens. Like, that's not good humanness, right? So I created a checklist. I had kind of like a lead driver parking. There's a site coordinating parking person. So he would be my liaison with the drivers. And so he would get this checklist, give them to all of them on Tuesday, or I guess they would get it when they got their payment. But he would collect them all on Wednesdays. So once a week, I was getting 22 pieces of paper, and I could batch the work, right? Deal with this all at one time, look at it all at once. So what's on there, who is the bus, what's the date, and then a checklist. Did you do the interior clean? Oh, and here's what we're expecting from the interior clean. What you should be doing weekly, what you should be doing daily. Linens, this might vary on different tours, but on our tour, the driver just needed to put a bag of fresh linens out. Everybody changed their own sheets. But then they need to be laundered by the driver And that's what they're kind of getting paid for. So I've been on other tours where the bus driver changes the sheets in the bunks. Personally, I would prefer to change my own sheets. But certainly like on a tour like this, we were not, sometimes there were like 18 people on a bus. So anyway, the linen, all they had to do was set the linens out and people would change their own. The exterior clean, you would see bus drivers are either cleaning the bus on the outside of the bus themselves, or they're driving it through a bus wash. In either case, they get paid the same amount of money, and they can choose, do they want to spend the time cleaning the bus, or do they want to take it to a bus wash and pay for it? So how they got it cleaned was up to them. They got paid the service the same either way. And then the generator service. And then I also included on there the complaints that I frequently got from bus drivers, things like, I can't do the cleaning because the bus riders are so messy. So bus riders are supposed to keep it in a condition that can be cleaned. And if they don't, then we need to have a conversation about this. Things like, on that tour, there weren't dressing rooms and offices for most of the people. So the bus was the place that people were hanging out during the day. So knowing that and taking that into account and what time, the bus drivers are inherently on a different schedule because they're driving at night and sleeping during the day. So figuring out a good time to do the cleaning, what's exactly expected of some random things like shower towel bags and how many times does the garbage have to get taken out, outlining those things. Like as the driver, it's your job to take the garbage out once. If the garbage is full, other than that, the riders are responsible for that. So really putting it in writing what is expected and what we can do if those expectations are not met on both sides, I found to be really helpful in it being a pleasant work living situation for all of the people involved, the drivers and the riders. So they would turn this sheet into me on Wednesdays, and they would check off what they had done, and then I could process this all at once. What I would do is I had a bus service spreadsheet, basically. I would use this, so this is the sheet that I would then, if you kind of look at this section, each item is listed. We know what number the bus is, who is the bus driver, what are the services, what's the rate, and then I could just go through the quantity and go, oh, they had 2 generator services, okay? So that's gonna now calculate a total for me that is due for the services for the 1 driver for the week. I would then, this next section over, took that information and put it in a format that I could paste it into my cash sheet. So the more times I could do things once and not have to retype them, I would set a format up so that I could copy and paste. So I would do the same thing on my per diem spreadsheet. I would do the same thing on my band payment sheet, where everything at some point had the columns that were consistent that I put into my cash sheet. Reference number, date, description, who's it paid to, description, city name, and amount. So then I could just, where it says for cash balance, I would just take the entire thing, copy that into the cash balance sheet. Don't have to retype it. Really cuts down on errors. I would set this section up, I set up to print on envelopes, because I found the more information you can give people, the fewer questions people will ask of you. So if I can give them an envelope that doesn't just say $280, but shows them how I arrived at that $280, a lot fewer questions. So when I set that up to print, the number 10 envelope is the most common kind of envelope that you'll find. Make sure you get the ones that have the tear off stickiness, that so that you don't have to lick them. That is key to all of this. And you should have a travel printer that like the Canon 100s or whatever. I meant to bring it out and show you. They are not much bigger than like a legal pad of paper, and they're like that fat. So travel printers are great. Print everything on envelopes. Such a time saver. So on this, my print is selected. You can see it's envelope size, and it is going to repeat the information up at top. So this was paid in Oak Park. The date that was paid was January 1st, 2018. If there were bonuses that we were paying, I would put it in there and the quantity in there, and that would update in all the places if we had like a bonus. So then what the driver, what would be putting out on the envelope is that highlighted bit of information. You can tell it to repeat rows at the top when you print. So on every envelope, it would print these top 3 rows, and then, or actually the top 5 rows, and then it would, on each envelope, print the bus specific information. So that was super helpful. The other thing though, and this will be great for per diems, I do it for per diems too, is so I know that I have, oops, I know that I need $11,820 to fulfill these envelopes, right? My 16 or 22 envelopes or whatever it is. But what denominations do I need that in? Because it's super annoying to sit down and fill up 22 envelopes and then realize like you only have 20s and you need 5s and 10s. So I always create a little thing where here I have the bill type, hundreds, 20s, 10s, and 5s, and then the bill quantity. This is a total of everything that's below. So in this case, 830, I would need 800s, I would need 120, 110, and 0 5s, right? That's gonna then update the total number of hundreds that I need, the total number of 20s. And if you're doing this where there's a lot of repetition, you can just, for now I know for everyone that I see that's for 725, which of course there's not going to be another one on there. There's one. I can just, you know, copy and paste that denominations. So looking at each one and doing that real quickly is a great way to then have the exact bills that you need when you're stuffing those envelopes. That's really helpful when it comes to per diems also, when you're handling a large volume. So that is what I wanted to tell you about the service envelopes. Okay, and so the one other thing that I want to show you is then the bus float envelopes. So this is, I get they're white 6-inch by 9-inch envelopes. So it's smaller than a letter size piece of paper. So it's a good size. It's not too big. It's not too tiny. People will still wad up all of their receipts and like shove them in there. Or just like you can tell that they like pulled just a wad out of their pocket. But ideally, they have flattened them out and at least written the reference number on them. So I created this bus driver float envelope to be in here. If I do the print, you can see how it'll kind of print on the envelope. It doesn't quite have as much border as it looks like on an actual envelope, but I found that the more guidance I can give people, the more they will provide information in the format that is most effective for me. So if I'm entering, because they're doing this all manually, but then I need to enter this. So I want to be able to enter all the fuel together so that I can type in fuel once and then just copy and paste that word for the next 6 lines, rather than having fuel and then bus supplies and then tolls and then fuel and then fuel and then tolls and then bus supplies. That requires more copying and pasting, more opportunity for error. So what I did was divide my envelope up into the main categories that I wanted them to put things in. And that's how I needed to code it for the business office. And then I also created what I want the reference number to be on there. So this will then help you be able to look back and know that anything with the reference number of F involved in it is going to be a fuel receipt. It also makes it easier when you're like looking at the receipts, and then they'll keep the receipts more together. So ideally, they're putting an F1 on the fuel receipt, and that's for, you know, $150 or whatever, and they're handwriting that on there. You know, bus supplies, they might be getting something at Walmart, and so I gave them a spot for, you know, an amount and the description. But like, I don't care if they're at Lowe's or Love's or TA, Travel America, or Flying J. Like, I don't care where you bought fuel. That is not important for like this. You can just put the dollar amount on there, is fine. Same thing with tolls, because I still have the receipts that I can look at. The bus supplies, it was easier to match them up if I knew where they were buying things at. And then I had an other column for, like, sometimes there's just stuff that doesn't fit into those main 3 categories. But those things should be few and far between. Then I have the instructions, write in the amounts, number the receipts, add it all up. You know, I can't tell you how many times I got handed envelopes that didn't have a total on it. I want a total not because I want to force the driver to do the math, but because I want to know that we are agreeing on that number. So you tell me what you think the total is, I'm going to tell you what I think the total is, and if they're not the same number, we're going to talk about it so that we can agree, right? And we can't do that if you haven't added it up yourself. So it's not about making more work for people, it's about verifying that it's accurate and preventing questions after the fact. So that is pretty much what I wanted to tell you about the float envelopes. I don't think that I feel like there was something else that I was missing. Also, another good time to print things on the envelopes is for per diems also, where I'll have like the full spreadsheet, but I'll set it up to just print one person's individual thing so that they can see the time period that they're getting the per diem for, so the exact dates and time period, what is the rate per day, how many days, and then the total amount. Alleviates lots of questions. So those were kind of the things that I wanted to tell you about my tour accounting tools today. Are there any questions on this? Or thank you 5-1 for thinking my tour info sheet is brilliant. You flatter me, I appreciate it. So any questions, you feel free to throw your hands up if you want to come on and ask anything live. Will I be sharing any of those sheets online? Yes-ish. So I am going to put the info sheets, let me see here. I'll put the settlement advance on. I'll put a PDF of the settlement sheet, but I'm not going to put the actual workbook on because everybody needs to make their own formulas and make it for themselves. So that I will give you a PDF. You can see what's happening, but you have to build your own. I'll do the same thing with the tour budget. And like I said, the Andy Reynolds tour book is a great resource that would have more information, particularly on that and lots of other stuff. I will share the info sheets and PDFs of the float envelope, maybe I'll do, so you can see what that is. So yes, if you go to jenkellogg.com, probably on Monday, realistically, there will be the video of this workshop, and I will put PDFs of a bunch of that stuff on there. So hopefully that's a good resource for you guys. Any other questions about anything? I know I ended up talking quite a bit longer than I anticipated. I like to take a lot of information and try to cram it in. So hopefully that was really useful and informative, and that you can find some takeaways in whether it's the specific thing, but even in just like the thought process that you can apply to your tour accounting situations or whatever situations that you're in that require taking a large volume of information and corralling that information, but then also when you have a large volume of people, communicating that information to them and with them. So you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you next week.